morning. We are thankful as a school community and honored today to welcome General Peter Pace, the 16th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. From 2005 to 2007, General Pace served as the highest-ranking military officer in the United States. General Pace is a good friend to all of us at Chaminade, and today marks his third visit to our school. General, we are grateful for your time and belief in our mission. In General Pace's role as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he served as the principal military advisor to President George W. Bush. After the September 11 attacks, General Pace aimed to win the war on terror by helping others build good governments and environments that, by their very existence, would discourage terrorist extremism. The general also encouraged collaborative relationships between agencies in Washington, working together to complement and strengthen national power. General Pace is a Catholic man and grew up not far from here in Teaneck, New Jersey. Upon completion of the basic school at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, Lieutenant Pace was deployed to Vietnam. His latest service led to the general from California, Buffalo, and Washington, to Korea, Somalia, and Japan. He was appointed vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs in 2001, just 3 weeks after 9/11. President Bush honored General Pace with the Presidential Medal of Freedom at his retirement, following 40 years of active military service. But someone General Pace met at the onset of those 40 years would influence his career profoundly. And it's someone who shares a common bond with each of you here today. General Pace joins us today to talk about this man, the impact he made, and how we can continue to honor him. Now, the 16th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Peter Pace.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, good morning. Thank you, Brother Tom. Appreciate it. It's great to be back home here for me. Although I'm not a Chaminade grad, I sure feel part of this family. I hope to be able to spend some time today just explaining to you all how a graduate of the class of 1967 here at Chaminade literally changed my life forever by the way that he sacrificed his. He graduated, as I said, in 1967 and left here and went to Parris Island boot camp in the Marine Corps. At the time that he was graduating from Chaminade, I was graduating from the Naval Academy, and I went to Quantico, Virginia. And then in February of 1968, he and I ended up in the same platoon together in Hue City during the Tet Offensive of 1968, and I'll get back to that. But Guido was a great young man who his fellow Marines just loved, and he had just enough imp in him, I guess, to keep his fellow Marines laughing and having a good time, but focused on the mission. On 30 July 1968, while my platoon of at the time about 35 Marines was on patrol outside of Da Nang, South Vietnam, an enemy sniper who was in a village fired at and hit Lance Corporal Guido Farinaro right in the middle of the chest. And I got to Guido before he died and was with him when he died. And although I had had Marines wounded before, I had not had a Marine killed in action. It infuriated me. So much so that I called in an artillery strike on the village from which the sniper had fired. Fortunately, it takes a while from the time you ask for artillery support until the folks on the artillery pieces can figure out where you are, where the enemy is, how to put the right information into the gun system to be able to fire. And during the time that we waited for the artillery to be fired, my platoon sergeant, who was the senior enlisted man in my unit, he was 21, I was 22. That platoon sergeant didn't say anything to me, but he just looked at me, and I knew by the way he was looking at me that what I was doing was wrong. Fortunately, I was able to call off the artillery and do what I should have done in the first place, which is put the platoon on line and sweep through the village on foot, which we did, and go figure, all we found was women and children. I don't know how I could live with myself today or even be standing in front of you today. I would not be standing in front of you today had I in fact conducted that strike. The very first impact then that was lifelong lasting for me about Guido's death was the fact that I was stunned that I almost did something so immoral in combat. Especially since before I went to Vietnam, I had thought through who I was and what I would allow myself to do in combat. What I learned that day that had stunned me was that, and it has been true for the rest of my life, every single time I've been challenged morally, it has been at a time when I am least prepared emotionally to deal with it. Not always about combat and death for sure, but even in today's business world, it isn't that people come to work or go to school or do whatever they're doing that day and they say to themselves, today I think I'll do something immoral. That's not how it happens. Maybe crooks think like that, but we don't. What happens is something unusual happens, something unexpected happens, something that gets your emotions flowing happens, and now you have to deal with it. And you don't think as straight as you otherwise would. And you start cutting corners and doing things you wouldn't do. I promised myself on 30 July 1968 that I would never let that happen again. And what I have done every day since 1968, including this morning, is think through what might happen today that will challenge me morally, and trying to set my moral compass about who I want to be tomorrow morning. Quite honestly, for the last 50 plus years, nothing I have ever thought about in the morning has actually happened that day that I thought might be a moral challenge. But what I commend to you is the process of each day setting your moral compass, deciding who you want to be tomorrow morning, and then living the life today so that you can be proud of the guy you see in the mirror tomorrow morning. It's like education. You will not remember every single class you take here at Chaminade. But Chaminade is helping you develop your brain in a way that allows you to problem solve. And if you will set your moral compass daily or weekly or however often you think you need to do it, it'll become part of your decision process. And you won't even be aware of it. But when something happens, you will, as part of your decision process, think to yourself, is this me? Would I be proud of myself if I was watching myself do this? So whatever way fits for you, where you're comfortable, I commend to you setting your moral compass by determining who you are today, who you want to be tomorrow, who you want to be next year, and living that life. Guido is not the only Marine I lost in combat, but he was the first. And for some reason, that has always been so very personal with me. The other Marines I lost were also great young men, all 18, 19, 20 years old. Corporal Chubby Hale and PSC Whitey Travers and Corporal Mike Witt, Staff Sergeant Freddie Williams, Lance Corporal Little Joe Arnold, Corporal Dan Miller. All great young men. For the seniors in here, 1 year from now, that's who they were back then. And they sacrificed themselves that we could come to schools like Chaminade and pursue the education we want and our own dreams in what is clearly, in my mind, the finest country on the planet. When I left Vietnam, I spent 1 week on Okinawa, Japan, kind of decompressing before being sent home. It was just part of the process. I went to church every day to try to understand why it was that Guido and those other young men had died and I did not get a scratch. And I put that in context. There are at least 3 times where I know I should have at least been wounded. During the Tet Offensive of 1968 in Hue City, where I first met Guido. Of our rifle company of 158 Marines, 155 were killed or wounded, mostly wounded. I was a rifle platoon leader. I was my platoon's third platoon leader in as many weeks. The previous 2 platoon leaders had been killed in that battle. I didn't get a scratch. Several months later, my platoon was given responsibility to provide security around an old French fort that was being used as a command post by my battalion commander. And it was considered a good deal because we spent the entire time in the field, and this French fort had a stream that had been converted into like a makeshift shower, so we could actually get clean. So my battalion commander would rotate platoons through the security thing, and we'd each have about a week there. And the first day we were there, as part of my responsibility, I had to understand the defenses that were already set up around the platoon area. So I went out and with a pad of paper and a pencil, did a sketch of the defensive positions, where the fighting holes were, where the wire was, both barbed wire, concertina wire, the rolled up wire, to make sure that I understood how to defend if we were attacked that night. And in the process of doing that, there were 2 strands of wire about 10 yards apart. And I walked between those strands of wires, just kind of shaking the wire and making sure it wasn't cut, making sure it was solid, just wandering back and forth. About 10 minutes into just wandering on the ground, the lieutenant who I was replacing came running out and yelled, "Pete, freeze, you're in a minefield." I had been wandering aimlessly back and forth for about 10 minutes in this minefield, and when I looked down, there was 3 prongs of what's called a bouncing Betty personnel mine that my right foot was right next to. I had wandered for 10 minutes. It took me 2 hours to get out of that place. I should have certainly been killed that day from stupidity, if nothing else. The third time I know about was on the 18th of August, 1968, when my company was on patrol. The lead elements of the company came under fire. My platoon was in the rear. We were told to come up and sweep across the objective from a different direction. And to do that, my company commander, who was a captain, brought the leaders up to be able to take a look at the area that we're going to attack across. And we were all kneeling down as he was telling us what he wanted us to do. And as we stood up to leave, Staff Sergeant Freddie Williams, who had been on my right, stepped across in front of me. And as we stood up and he stepped across in front of me, the enemy sniper pulled a trigger that was aimed at my chest and hit Freddie in the side, and he died instantly. Those are the things I know about. So on Okinawa, in church, I said my prayers trying to figure out why I didn't get a scratch in 13 months and why great young men like Guido had sacrificed themselves, and most importantly, what it was that I was supposed to do. The best answer I thought I heard was that I was supposed to stay on active duty. Now, I had not planned on staying on active duty. I had planned on spending my 4 years and getting out. But after Vietnam and after Guido's death, there was no way that I could get out. Because I believed then, as I believe today, that I owed then and still owe now more than I could ever repay, especially to great young men like Guido Fariner. So I've lived my life since coming home in 1969. I've tried to live my life in a way that has paid respect to the way that Guido and the other Marines had sacrificed their lives for us. It has been more than an obligation. It has been more like a calling. And quite honestly, there were times in our military, especially in the 1970s, when life was not very pleasant. We had race riots. We had problems where the officer of the day in the United States had a pistol with live rounds in it to protect himself from his own troops, if you can imagine that. This was not the Marine Corps I thought I had joined. But when I thought about possibly getting out, Guido kept coming back to me. And the deal I had made with the good Lord was that I would stay on active duty until I was no longer needed, and I would know I was no longer needed when I did not get promoted. That part worked out okay. If there were disappointments in my life, and there were, when I thought I should be going to a certain job and I was given something different, I would give myself about 24 hours to complain about it, and then I would remember that I owed Guido and those other Marines, and I was just going to strap it on. Turns out every time I was disappointed in where I went and got over it and did the best I could, the experience that I got in whatever that job was made a huge difference in the trajectory of my career as I look at it in retrospect. When I would testify in front of Congress as vice chairman and chairman, if you've ever seen any of those videos, and there's no reason why you should, but if you ever see one and you see me testifying, you'll see that most folks, when they testify in front of Congress, have all these big 3-ring binders, and the senator would ask a question, they'd flip through and read an answer that somebody else had printed for them. I didn't do that. My belief was that if I was in front of Congress, if they asked me a question, if I didn't know the answer, I shouldn't make one up, but I sure ought to be able to answer their questions without reading something else that somebody else wrote from it. But I did do this every single time. There was a pad of paper so you could take notes while you were being questioned so you could answer the question. And I would always write at the very top of the paper, Lance Corporal Guido Farinaro. And the reason I did that was because somewhere during that hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours, however long I was going to be answering questions, somebody would get a little bit in my face, or perhaps not say things that were as kind as I think they should have been to me, or whatever that would get my blood bubbling a little bit. And I would read Guido's name, and I would remind myself, he deserved me to do my job. And my job was to answer the question, not get upset about the way it was being asked. So not only has Guido influenced what I've done with my life, he has influenced in huge measure how I have lived or tried to. I retired from active duty on 1 October 2007. The very first time I had the privilege of standing here in the school was on purpose my last public speech before retirement. I gave the speech the September, retired October, because it was important to me, as it is today, to stand in front of you and to let you know how important each and every one of you Chaminade students is. There's no doubt in my mind that then 19-year-old Lance Corporal Guido Farinaro, there's no doubt that in my mind, he never ever thought that his lieutenant would become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Nor did he know that he was going to sacrifice himself for us. Nor would he have guessed the impact he would have on me and so many others. Neither can you understand what the good Lord has planned for you. But if you are in this school today, and if you are hearing my voice today, you are an important person to the good Lord. And He has you on a path that you cannot yet understand. But by the way you live your lives here as students at this great school, when you go on to college or whatever you do next, you may not be able to understand how you are affecting other people, but you definitely will be. And you may very well be disappointed, as I was, along the way. The first disappointments you're going to have, I'm sure, are in college rejections. You know what? The college that rejected you, you weren't supposed to go there. You're supposed to go to the college that accepts you. May not be perfectly clear. When I was 17, I applied to Manhattan College, to Fordham, to Columbia, and the Naval Academy. I wanted the Naval Academy. I was lucky I got it. I got into Fordham. I got into Manhattan. I was rejected, as I should have been, by Columbia. I remember my mom, I was 17, I remember my mom saying, Does it hurt your feelings to not get into Columbia? I don't know why I said it, but I remember saying it. I said, no, I'm not supposed to go to Columbia. I'm supposed to go to the Naval Academy. For those of you who are seniors now and you're going through this process of applying to schools, you will get acceptance letters and rejection letters. Have the humility to accept the rejections and have the grace to accept whatever school it is you decide to go to as the path that you're supposed to be on. Incredibly, in the last year, thanks to a lady who's in this office, in the audience right now, who knew then Guy, who I call Guido Farinaro, that many years ago, I've been put in contact with Guido's sister after 50 years. That's a blessing. July 30th of this year, as we were getting close to it, and I realized that it was 50 years since Lance Farinaro died, my wife and I discussed how we might be able to properly commemorate his memory. And I tell you this not to pat myself on the back. Please don't take it this way. I tell it because it's important for me to tell you how important Chaminade is in my life. That since I have retired from active duty in the military, the good Lord has given me resources that I never dreamed possible. And my wife and I have committed to the school that we will endow a scholarship that will be given each year to a freshman. It'll be a 4-year scholarship for that freshman each year forever. We have our first Lance Corporal Guido Farinaro Memorial Scholarship recipient in this room today. In this school, if it's here for 100 years or 200 years, there will always be, beginning 3 years from now, there will be 4 young men in this school forever who will be here, at least in part, hopefully, because Guido Farinaro's life changed my life, and now it's my chance, I hope, with my wife, to be able to share some of the resources we've gotten to be able to endow this scholarship in Guido's memory. The Gold Star Stadium here stands in tribute to so many Chaminade grads who have sacrificed themselves for us. I was asked again this morning, as I am often, do you miss being on active duty? It's been 11 years. The answer is I miss nothing about Washington, D.C. But I do miss being on active duty. I do miss being able to hug the troops and tell them I love them. I do miss having the opportunity to influence the decision process in a way that I hope was good for the nation. None of it would have happened without Guido Farinaro and this incredible school. So, Brother Tom, thank you for allowing me to come back again and speak. Thank you for all that you and all the staff here do for these great young men. And if I may, I'd be delighted to answer questions until Brother Tom says we're done. You can ask questions about anything you want. Nothing's out of bounds. If I know the answer, I will give you a straight shot. If I don't, I'll make something up. By the time you're absolutely sure I made it up, I'll be gone. It'll be okay. And often in a group like this, it's a little difficult for somebody to ask the first question. So let's skip the first question and go straight to the second question. Okay, so who's got the second question? Got microphones here? Just stand up, or there you go, right here.
Uh, General Pace, as you mentioned that for 50 years you ask yourself each morning why you how would your moral compass be challenged that day. As you were chairman, joint chiefs of staff, what would you say would be the one event where your moral compass was challenged?
Hmm. I don't think it was challenged per se. It certainly played in my thought process. For example, when we were asked by President Bush 43 to develop a plan to go into Iraq, as a military officer, I had to respond. I have a responsibility to carry out all orders unless the order is either A, illegal, or B, immoral. If it's illegal, you can pretty much get some help by the lawyers around you and the state of uh, um, legislation, for example. So the legal part you can figure out fairly quickly and with a lot of help. The immoral part is more difficult because morality is very much personal. Now, all of us here at Chaminade have had similar educations, similar family backgrounds, but out in the world, there's all kinds of religions, there's all kinds of high schools and colleges, there's all kinds of communities. So everybody grows up different, and how you think about things morally is impacted by that. So when it comes to, for me, as a military person, deciding whether or not a order is moral, I'm basically standing on my own lily pad. That's for me to figure out. Yeah. So, for example, when the president said, develop plans to do this or do that, take Iraq, for example, one of the things I had to do for myself was, while doing what he told me to do, develop the plans, think through whether or not I believed going into Iraq was a moral thing to do. And I did, by the way. There were 27 million people, had a dictator been there 30 years. My moral background now was I was born in 1945, okay? When I grew up, it was all about watching World War II Victory at Sea movies and seeing all the things that the United States had done for freedom around the planet. And we still had, and still do today, post World War II, troops in Germany, troops in Japan at their request, troops in Korea. So in my mind, we have been a force for freedom and good. So as I'm thinking through that prism about going into Iraq and the potential of freeing 27 million people from a dictator and giving them a chance to live their lives better, to me that was a moral thing to do. And I was perfectly fine with doing that. Okay? Now, we have made errors in execution. And if I could take back some of my recommendations, I would. But if you gave me today the exact same data that I had back then, I'd give you the exact same recommendation, even though in hindsight, there was a better way to go about doing whatever that thing might have been. But at the time, it was legal, it was moral, I thought it through the best I could, I gave my best recommendations. Okay, and so that's how I believe it plays out. I never, in 40 plus years, had what I believe to be a true moral crisis problem, because the process of putting together orders is more collaborative than you would think. And folks just don't order us to go do things at the drop of a hat or on a whim. Okay? Truthfully, I have had more moral challenges in the 11 years that I've been in corporate life than I had on active duty. Okay? I told you I'd give you a straight answer. One, there's a boatload of money out there. And if you're not careful, you can listen to the siren song of millions of dollars and lose sight of who you are as a person. Next, In my Marine Corps, for 40 years, there were about 7% of the Marine Corps are women. So I was not in contact with a lot of women on a daily basis. I am now. Truthfully, at age 73, it's mostly in my head, but still, I'm going through the process of trying to figure out, what do I do with women? Okay. You don't do anything with women other than respect them, but the opportunity financially and otherwise is much more prevalent in the life I'm leading now than it was in the monastic life I led in the Marine Corps. Okay, I'm just sharing that with you. But I believe that thinking through every morning what might happen that day helps me understand when I'm at a bar, maybe had one or two too many drinks at 3 o'clock in the morning, not 3 o'clock in the morning, not anymore, 11 o'clock at night, it helps me understand it's time to go home, not to get next to the lady next to me. Okay, that makes sense? Okay. Did that answer your question? Okay. What else? Couple back there. Okay. I'll let you all with the microphones decide who's going to ask a question. If you can just kind of wave at me so I can focus in.
So fighting in Vietnam, which like a war that didn't have a lot of support at home, did you ever, you or your troops, did you ever feel like you couldn't exactly, you were questioning the cause of the war, you thought that maybe, this was not something that a lot of the public supported and you had difficulty fighting it, and did it make it more difficult for you to be in that war knowing that a lot of people back home weren't supporting you?
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, I knew when I joined the Marine Corps, which was 1967, that part of the country was very supportive of the war that was going on in Vietnam, excuse me, and part of the country was not. I came to peace in my own mind with going because, again, my background was the United States is a force for good in the world. I believe that helping the Vietnamese people was a good thing to do. I believe that if we didn't push back against communism someplace in the world, that it would continue to fester and grow. I believe, as I do today, that the more people that are free on the planet, the more stable our democracy and our freedom is. So I had made the decision that for me, it was the right thing to do, okay? When I got into combat, all the things that were going on back here, I shut them out completely. I was focused. And when you're in combat with a guy on your right and a guy on your left, you're not thinking a whole lot about what's on the front page of the New York Times. You're thinking about today's responsibilities, how we're going to do what we got to do, how we're going to survive this and get home. When I came home, after serving what I thought was honorably, and having my fellow citizens disparage my uniform, that hurt. And I can tell you this, I believe the Vietnam War taught a lot of folks a lot of things about themselves. For guys in the military, it taught us that the press was not the enemy that we had thought they were, and we treated them that way, and therefore they got to be more that way. And for our fellow citizens, they realize, and today will come up to you and say, if they don't agree with what's going on militarily, they will say to you something like, hey, I do not agree with the war in Iraq, but I appreciate your willingness to defend our country. And the press was embedded then in the attack into Baghdad so that they could see for themselves. So I think the whole country learned a lot of lessons coming out of Vietnam, whether you were military, a civilian, or in the press, about how we got that mix wrong in Vietnam and how we have tried to make it right this time. And I do believe as a nation that we have really matured in that way. But to answer your question, for me personally, I made the decision it was the right thing to do, and then I forgot about all the noise while I was in combat, and then I dealt with it when I came home. Did that answer it? Okay.
How did you choose the freshman for the scholarship? What was your criteria?
How did I choose the what? I'm sorry, the criteria for the scholarship? Thank you. Very, very complex. I said to Brother Tom, you pick the student, I'll send the resources. What I asked for was simply this. I wanted to make sure that the student was someone who would have a chance to get to know who Guido Farinero was. That the student would have the responsibility to get good grades, because it's not here's a 4-year scholarship, have a good life. It's here's a 4-year scholarship, you got to keep earning it each year, and the school will determine that. But the school is going to decide which student should get it. And I'm hoping, just generically, I'm hoping that over time, that young men who might not otherwise have had the opportunity to come here would be helped in a decision to come here by the scholarship availability. Okay. Thanks for asking that. Yes, sir.
What are some important attributes that these young men might hold to become successful leaders in the future?
The question is, what are some of the important attributes that you young men might hone to become good leaders in the future? I think if I were to pick one word, and there are many that I've learned along the way about leadership, but I think it takes integrity to be a good person, to be a good leader. And someone once told me, Pete, if you have integrity, nothing else matters. And if you do not have integrity, nothing else matters. And if you think about that concept, it rings very loud and very clear. Not everybody agrees with things I've said, things I've done. That's fine. But I'm proud of the fact that people know I will speak my mind clearly and I will live my life as best I can in a way that pays respect. So I'm proud that my reputation is one of being a man of integrity. Oh, by the way, I believe if you think you do have integrity, if you think you are a good leader, if you think you are a good Catholic, whatever you think you are, at the instant you start believing in yourself that way, you're in trouble. You got to earn it every day. The fact that I lived, hopefully, a life of integrity yesterday does not guarantee that I will do so today. And the fact that I was fortunate to get promoted many, many times in the Marine Corps, and people think I'm a good leader, doesn't mean I am or that I will be today. It means that I've been given a certain amount of responsibility, and my responsibility now in executing those, whatever the job I have is to do it as best I can. Quite honestly, I always was nervous. And I do commend to you to embrace the feeling in the pit of your stomach that says to you, or whispers in your ear, am I good enough? When I was lieutenant or captain, I took that feeling of inadequacy not as something was like this, but what gives me the right to lead these men? I took that feeling in my first 5 to 10 years in the Marine Corps as maybe some kind of a weakness in my personality. But then I realized it was actually a benefit to me to be uncomfortable. That being nervous about being good enough for whatever this new job was, and oh, by the way, it was every single time, to include when I went from being vice chairman to being chairman, the thought through my mind was, why am I getting this assignment? Am I good enough to do it? That angst gave me the adrenaline shot I needed to do my homework the best I could, and reminded me every day that I had to earn the right every day to have whatever job it was that I had. So if you can live your life with integrity and understand how fortunate you are to have whatever responsibility it is that you have, and if you're in a leadership position, to understand that there's no way any of us can possibly give to our followers the kind of leadership they deserve. All we can do is give them the best that we're able to give them. And I think if you do that, you're going to live very, very impactful and satisfying lives. That answer your question? Last question?
Did you ever find the sniper that killed Guido? And if so, do you think if you didn't, do you think you would be able to forgive him today?
No, we did not. And yes, I could. Despite the incredible, where'd you go? I lost it. Thanks. Despite the incredible carnage of a place like Hue City, for example, in Vietnam, for some reason I've always understood that I was on the battlefield because I believed it was the right thing to do. And I believe our enemies are on the battlefield because they believe the same thing. You ever watch World War II movies, every once in a while they have the German commander saying, whose side is God on? And when you think about it, you say, yeah, of course the guy who's fighting on the other side believes in what he's fighting for. This is not murderers versus murderers. This is, for us, patriots defending our freedom, and guys on the other side doing what they're doing for whatever reason they're doing it, but they believe they're doing the right thing also. Okay. So it was never personal for me. And I will tell you, although it was not the sniper, in February of 2013, I went back for the 45th anniversary of the Battle of Hue. And the group I went with went to Hue City and then retraced our path from Hue down to Phu Bai, down to Da Nang, and out to An Hoa, where we had fought. And one place, we went wherever we wanted to go. I went to the place where on 18 August 1968, I lost Corporal Chubby Hale, PSC Whitey Travers, Corporal Mike Witt, and Staff Sergeant Freddie Williams. I went back to that village that my platoon had been told to sweep through. This is a spot where the sniper pulled the trigger and got Staff Sergeant Williams instead of me. Went back to that village, and with guys from my platoon, rewalked the ground. And we had our wives with us. My wife couldn't go because she had just had an operation, but we had women with us. And as we were coming back out of the village, a lady from one of the houses comes out and asks the ladies if they would like to use the facilities in her house. They said yes. Because there were strange ladies in his house, the man of the house came out. And we started to talk. And through an interpreter, he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm here because on this day in 1968, we had a battle here." He says, "I was here then. I was Viet Cong. I was fighting you." I thought maybe he was putting me on. So I asked the interpreter, I said, explain to me, if you would, how you saw the battle unfold that day. And he had it spot on from the things I knew. So I knew this guy was telling the truth. We hugged each other. We said a prayer for those who had been killed on both sides. We took pictures together. This is 45 years later. There was no animosity. Truthfully, if I was told by my government to go hunt that guy down tomorrow on a battlefield, I would do so. I don't hate him. But I would do what my country needed me to do to defend our freedom. But it's not a love-hate thing. It's a duty and an honor to do what we do for our country, but it's not personal. Does that answer your question? Let me thank Brother Tom again for the invitation to talk to you all. I know there's a lot of questions, but God bless you all, and thank you. Thank you.
Get better.